Special welcome to today's podcast. Today, I am super excited to have Adrian on the podcast to discuss the Agile way of thinking. I am very passionate about Agile because our business does offer Agile project management certification, and we push the agenda of leaders being able to embrace Agile thinking. So Adrian is the guru of the Agile Way. He is the program manager at FNB. Adrian, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for making time to come and give your thoughts, leadership on the Agile way of doing things or the Agile way of thinking. To start our conversation, I would love you to just tell us about yourself and just your career journey, the journey that you've walked to get to where you are now as an Agile coach in FNB.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so good morning, everybody, and it's so great to have this opportunity to chat to you. Just in terms of my career, I started out as a fledgling from university. I did a BCom degree and I focused on informatics, and went out to a small business as my first job out of university, where I was asked to develop some software for the team. So we were a really small organization. I was the IT department. So I had to go out there and do the whole gambit from gathering the requirements, interviewing the users, trying to understand what it was that they needed, interacting with the leadership of the company, and trying to cobble together the requirements, and then building the actual software itself and testing it out, and then getting it rolled out to the users, etc. So that was quite a journey of learning and self-discovery for me. Since it was a small business, I wound up being the whole IT department as well. So I had to build computers and fix networking, and anytime there was a problem, I had to stop coding and go off and try and solve the business needs so that I could get them back up and running again. So that was kind of the formation, the starting point for my career. I then went overseas on a working holiday visa for a couple of years and had an opportunity to work in England at various different organizations. I think the most significant of those was working for a medical health company where I was one of the technical team looking after the database administration side of things. After coming back from the UK, I was at a loose end trying to decide what to do, and I set my sights on getting into a multinational so that I could get some international exposure. And I became a consultant at a company then called Staffware. They were a business process management company based out of the UK, with customers in South Africa, obviously, but around the world. So I spent 5 years working for that company and had the most amazing opportunity to grow within the space and to work with lots of different blue chip companies, both domestically and abroad. I spent a lot of my time at Nedbank, actually, whilst I was working for Staffware. So I had an opportunity to be deeply immersed in the banking side of our industry, in addition to working for telcos, etc. as well. And at that time, we identified that there was a need for implementation partners in the South African context to go out there and help these big companies on their journey of adopting a new tool. At that point, we were just starting to get onto the business process automation side of things. It was a new to the industry, one of the new ideas, and so we were kind of in the early adopter and into the start of the business process management wave that has become so well entrenched within business these days. We're all about automated processes. So at any rate, me and a couple of colleagues left the multinational and we started up our own company locally to grow professional services in the space. And we were very fortunate in that the company that we'd chosen to partner with had a lot of blue chip clients of their own. So as a result, we got to work in a lot of the big corporates around South Africa, and lots of different industries. So, I mean, I even did a foray into mining, which was very interesting. Then I was way out of my wheelhouse. So I didn't stay there for very long. But yes, spent a lot of time in insurance and financial services companies, and a bit of time with telcos, etc. And then after about 10 years working and leading that company that we founded, my partners and I decided to go our separate ways because we had visions for what we wanted out of the company. And then I became a full-time employee of FNB, actually. So I started out in a development team at FNB as a team lead, technical team lead, helping to develop software for our various business units. And then I quickly gravitated into a Scrum Master role because I had obviously connected well with the Agile way of working. And so they asked me to lead the team that I was looking after. And shortly thereafter, I was promoted into a management position, looking after several teams. And we really understood how to do the Agile stuff quite well. We had all our Kanban boards set up and we were running Scrum in a pretty effective way. So lots of other teams from around the bank started coming to us and asking us how to do these things. And at that point, the CEOs identified the fact that me and a couple of colleagues were the go-to people from an Agile perspective, and they then decided to start an Agile coaching competence within FNB. And they contracted in some foreign, a German company with the South African office, Agile 42, to come and mentor us. So we went on a 2-year mentorship journey with them. And then we were the Agile coaches for this crazy big department of about 2,000 people. So it was pretty wild. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's how I got into Agile coaching.
Amazing. You've had such a very exciting career journey. But also, what's very interesting is that you came with a beacon into the industry.
Yes.
There's always this notion that for people to be involved, especially in tech or software side of things, you should have a computer science degree. So it's actually very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. All the hardcore techies that kind of get into the assembly language, low-level coding, etc., they tend to come from the computer science background. But there's an awful lot of people from a commerce background as well who also overlap with IT, and they have a better knack of translating business requirements into working solutions. So there's a partnership that takes place within the IT department.
Absolutely. All right, then you are the Agile coach. You are the guru of this concept, that people are raving about. Let's start our conversation by just you defining to us what the Agile way of thinking is. What is Agile?
Sure. So Agile, in essence, boils down to this thing called the Agile Manifesto. So there was a group of senior software engineers who got together in the 90s, and they decided there had to be a better way to deliver software. Back in those days, we were all sitting on these complex requirements with these long project life cycles where we would take 5 years to build a new solution and bring it to market, and invariably we would wind up 80% of the time building the wrong thing, actually. It was so frustrating. So they said there has to be a better way. And so they got together and over a weekend, they hashed out this thing called the Agile Manifesto. And at its core, there were 4 values that they said, okay, so these are the things that we have learned in our experience work the best. And the core values were individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So let's talk to one another, right? Rather than relying on these processes and tools that we've built. It was also about creating working software rather than spending a lot of time documenting these comprehensive requirements. So although they said that the comprehensive requirements and the processes and tools, etc., are still important, but the things that they've stressed value on were more important. So the individuals and interactions, the working software, the customer collaboration as well, or stakeholder collaboration, as we've come to know it, where we actually start to engage those stakeholders in an ongoing dialogue rather than having these protracted contract negotiations where we kind of spell out all the terms and conditions of our relationship and invest an inordinately large amount of time in trying to formalize a structure before we actually start building something of value. And then, of course, my other favorite, which I've come to learn, is responding to change over following a plan, right? So all planning is useful, but invariably the plans don't work out the way we intended them to, particularly when it gets to anything, slightly more complex than planning a family picnic. Even that might not go as you expected it would. And so we have to learn to respond to change as we go along. So all plans are wrong, as they say, and some are useful. So no plans work out exactly as we thought they would.
Yeah. No, I love what you're saying about just being responsive in terms of being able to change plans. And I mean, COVID has taught us that, right? It's the new way of life now. You can't stick with what you've planned because there's so much other variables that will come at you, as a leader. So you need to have that capability to be able to respond and change accordingly.
So I don't know about you, Sarah, but when COVID first hit, I went into a flat panic because my job was people facing, and all of a sudden we couldn't be in the same room as people anymore. And we were used to, in an agile way of working, we used to have these Kanban boards stuck up on our walls, and we had sticky notes everywhere, and we'd be moving the stickies and lots of physical interaction. And all of a sudden we couldn't do that anymore because we were now thrust into this virtual world. And so we had to figure out, how do we pivot quite quickly? And that became the buzzword, right? Pivot. I think it's been so overused now. Everyone rolls their eyes when they hear it. But it was the story of our life, right? So we've had to all shift and come up with a new way of being.
Exactly. And I love that it's been a new way of being, right? Because it's really taken a whole total mind shift in the way we think and the way we do things as well. In the past, we insisted on, let's be in person. But now, we're giving options to people, and the people are
this conversation. Yes, I mean, we wouldn't be able to do this if the world hadn't changed.
Exactly. And it will take us so much time as well to be able to do this, because it's getting together, sitting in traffic, a thing that should have taken us an hour, 30 minutes, we'll probably have to set aside 4 hours for the day.
Yes.
So yes, some positives have come out, especially in terms of just the way people have embraced technology, and just the mind shift that has come as a result of what we've been through. So now let's talk about the difference between the agile way of thinking and agile project management. And let's stretch it to even talk about Scrum Master, because these three are actually quite interrelated.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think one of the key things that when you're talking about an agile way of solving problems is there is this mindset shift that has to take place, where you start to change your problem solving techniques, right? So we put new tools in our toolbox, and we have to figure out different ways of managing projects, for example. So in traditional plan-driven projects, we tend to try and map out a whole lot of stuff up front because we've got this new requirement that's landed on our lap. And we think, if we invest a whole bunch of time right at the start, we are going to be able to plan out this great plan, and then we will have a degree of certainty when it comes to delivering the end product down the line on the deadline dates that we had in mind. But as I mentioned a moment ago, all plans are wrong, right? And so no plans survive first contact with the real world. And so that's what tends to happen, and it's so sad, actually. And I think that's part of why the agile movement is gaining so much traction, is that we invest all this time, and then it tends to be a waste of effort. We've spent a week or maybe a month even putting this amazing Gantt chart together and these fantastic plans, where in fact what would have perhaps been more useful is to adopt an agile philosophy of saying, okay, let's rather invest 2 or 3 days together. Let's all get in a room and have a big conversation around what it is that we need to solve, what the problem is we're trying to come up with an answer to, and then put a bunch of to-do list items onto our backlog and say, right, these are the things we think we're going to need to build in order to create a great solution for this particular challenge. And then obviously, of course, we need to come up with some degree of ordering those items, because you can't just dive in there and do everything in a willy-nilly order. So we have to prioritize the work. So we have a prioritized backlog of work, which is like our master to-do list, and we have an idea of more or less the different tasks are going to sit on that to-do list. And then the stuff at the top of the list we know is most important, and we kind of give it a bit of we invest a bit of time in trying to decide what is the logical sequence in which we have to do things. We've got to build the foundation for this new solution before we can actually start to add the features on top of it, for example. And then how do we go about actually building out and start working on that backlog? That's where the Scrum Masters come in. So the Scrum Masters are the Agilists who have connected deeply with the Scrum way of doing things. And so, I mean, there's a couple of different frameworks. I'd like to say there's lots, but to be honest, there's 2 or 3 that are kind of the mainstay of Agile ways of working. And by far the most popular is Scrum. So there's a whole history around Scrum, which we can touch on if we have the time. But in essence, it's a structured way of working where we come up with what they call cadences, and we create this repeatable pattern of saying, right, at the start of our sprint, we're going to do a bit of planning and figure out what we're going to be doing for the duration of the sprint. And our typical sprint lasts between sort of 2 and 4 weeks. In my experience, 2 weeks is the sweet spot. That's kind of the just right amount where we can give each other that feedback, but at the same time, we have enough time to do something that's sort of a more meaty piece of work. And then we get together every day, obviously, and we do the daily stand-ups. And so the Scrum Master is the leader who takes the team through all of this stuff. They're the person who has the connection with the theory, but also they have the experience of working in a practical way as well. So they kind of the coaches within the team, I suppose. So there's different levels of coaching, and you have leadership people that coach. You have the Scrum Masters who actually coach the team in their ways of working. And then you have someone like myself who's had a background in Agile coaching, where I help to move the whole system forward, and kind of, just like a tennis coach. Even Rafael Nadal has a tennis coach, and he's number 1 in the world, or at least he has been. And someone can sit there and watch him and say, no, Rafa, you're twisting your wrist as you flick that racket over, and like you've got to actually do it something different. And so the coach does the same from an Agile perspective. They observe how the group is working, and then they can give you that guidance and sort of say, okay, I understand you're trying to implement a daily stand-up, but this is what I'm observing, and this is how you could do it better.
Awesome. So before we started recording, we did talk about the fact that one of the challenges that we find with the Agile approach is that it doesn't stick. Do you just want to speak to what you think? Let's dive into those challenges that you've observed and experienced, and then B, how do we overcome these challenges, for us to be able to see the success of this concept?
Yeah. So thanks, Sarah. Absolutely. I think when you're working in a department as large as the one that we came from, we had many different areas that were all wanting help on the Agile way of working. So we would kind of spend 6 months with the team and get them to a level where the Scrum Masters had kind of connected with the Scrum way of working, and they created a relationship within the team, and they were running their normal Agile cadences on a predictable schedule. And you could see that the team was starting to flourish in their Agile ways of working. But then we would leave as the coaches, and slowly the system tends to go back to the old ways of working, right? Because you find there's people in the team that have got 10, 15 years work experience, and they've formed habits, and they have a particular way of doing things. And so when there isn't that pressure to maintain the Agile ways of working and to kind of keep it top of mind, we have entropy creeping in, where things start to go back slowly to the old ways of working. And then, it was quite disheartening sometimes to go back after a year or two to a team that we had got into a really great space, and then to see how they'd kind of fallen back into so many of their older ways of working. So as I was just reflecting with you a bit earlier, a colleague and I, a coaching colleague, were sort of saying to one another, what shifted for us? How did we change our default way of problem solving from a more traditional plan-driven way of planning out problems. What you learned in Boy Scouts, you had to make all these great plans if you wanted to cross a river, and then you would action your plan, etc., and hopefully you would get to the other side. A more flexible way of tackling stuff and responding to change, because that's kind of what Agile is all about, right? You inspect and adapt and say, okay, I know we were going to build this new solution, and we've started putting the foundation together, and now we found that in fact there's this new technology that's just come to market, and it's going to make our lives so much easier. Rather than sticking to this old plan that we've kind of mapped out, how can we shift our plans and embrace this new possibility that's just come up? For us, we observed that our default way of problem solving had shifted from a more traditional plan-driven way of solving problems to an agile approach, where we would actually, when someone came to us with a requirement, they would say, in our example, we need this big progress report, and we want it by Monday next week. We'd never done anything like that before. Our go-to problem-solving stance was to say, right, let's break it down into the different components. Let's figure out all the different bits and pieces that we need to put into this solution, and then let's visualize it on a Kanban board, and then let's divide up the work between us and figure out how we build out this new report. And so the mind shift happens, but you have to persevere for a while, right? And that's where you need a mentor. You need someone who's just kind of guiding you and saying, I see that you're slipping back into this old way of working, or that thing that you did there, like how did that work out for you, and how is it compared to what you've learned? So you need someone to almost hold you accountable, I guess, in terms of new ways of working. Otherwise, you do tend to revert back into your old habits.
So I love what you're saying, and from your reflections, you're also saying, you just need to live it out on a daily basis. It's almost like you create an intention to just say, I'm gonna take on this new way of doing, my projects, and you persevere in there. So do you think then maybe having a coach consistently there would be the answer? But again, the question then would be, for how long would the coach stay? Or should then agile teams always insist on having a mentor and a coach, long term? What would be your thoughts on that?
So that's a really great question, Sarah, and I think it's something that I'm experiencing at the moment and kind of grappling with on my own personal journey. So I've been in the agile coaching capability for about 5 years, where I was working across a whole bunch of different teams and working with leadership, etc. And in fact, the one thing we did find that made all the difference for those teams is if they had dedicated Scrum Masters and product owners. So in the early days, leadership was very reluctant to appoint people in those dedicated roles, and they used to say, oh well, I know we need a Scrum Master, but can't we just take the technical team lead and give them 30% of their time will be devoted to being a Scrum Master, and then the rest of the time they'll continue being the technical team lead. And in my experience, what happens when you ask people to put multiple hats on is they wind up doing a mediocre job of several things rather than an excellent job of one thing. So having a dedicated Scrum Master really helped us to create that lasting change within the teams we worked in. And so that was one of the big levers that shifted in terms of getting the change to stick. But on my own journey as well, once the coach leaves, it's always good to have a coach around that you can call on to come in and spend a bit of time with your team. If you feel like there's a particular issue you're struggling with, like maybe your retrospectives are not great and you just want to try and breathe a bit of life back into them again, you can get a bit of external help. What I've come to learn is that there is a big need for permanent coaches within an organization that's embracing a big change, like an agile journey. And they kind of, they move around a little bit, and so they can work with a range of different Scrum Masters across a couple of different departments once they've got that initial shift to happen. But also, we tend to leave as coaches, and then the system kind of reverts back to older ways of working. So now what I've actually done is I've shifted my role. My official title changed from agile coach to program manager. Although, to be honest, I'm an agile program manager, which means that probably a high time I still spend coaching the team. And the experiment that we're trying now is to see what happens if you have a coach long-term in the team, and how do things change? And what we're starting to see is that the type of challenges that you are able to address kind of move to the next order. So how to begin with, you're just putting the fundamentals in. Now we can start to build on the next order of challenges, where we say, well, we've got the fundamentals down, that the team is very good at having their agile cadences, and we're bringing the business in. And so that's the challenge that we've been focusing on for the last 6 months, is saying, how do we get closer to our business and make sure that we break down this barrier? Because I don't know about your experience, but certainly in the big corporate worlds that I've come from, there tends to be this invisible divide, the Chinese wall between business and tech. They're like, we have this love-hate relationship where we toss things over the wall at each other. And it can become very, very toxic after a while, where we really have this, we butt heads with one another, and we have this oppositional relationship. And so what we're trying very hard to do is figure out, how do we bring the team together and get them to realize that actually we're all one team, right? And we have a business capability, we have a technical capability, and how do we marry those two together so that we can execute on all these amazing ideas that the business has, and actually deliver a working platform, that will support the idea that they're wanting to build out. So we're starting to see some great signs of success in terms of making sure we have these bigger teams that include all the different competencies. So yes, the long-lived coaching experience can really accelerate the overall productivity of your organization and take it to new heights, right? I think you can imagine how awesome it is not having people throwing things over the fence at each other and actually feeling like they're in this together. So we've had examples where the business, we don't even really think about it as business and tech anymore. Like, well, there's just these team members, and they happen to be our business analysts, but here they are with the techies, working on a particular challenge. So maybe they're working a little bit into the evening, or perhaps on a Saturday or Sunday morning, they have to do a deployment together or whatever it is. And so there they are, partnering up with one another, and there's none of this us and them mentality any longer. And so yes, you can have these amazing shifts if you do invest in long-term coaching and agile leadership program.
Amazing. So probably maybe that would be the recommendation. So it will be very interesting to see how your experiment turns out, with what you're doing now, because you're saying you've just been doing it for 6 months, right?
Yeah.
So it will be interesting to see, long term, a year, what happens. But it's actually interesting to hear that already you're seeing positive, impact as a result of having, a permanent coach there. I suppose it is like that for many things. Hey, people want somebody to hold their hand. Because change also takes a long time to actually be embedded into people's thinking and into people's way of doing things.
Yeah, and I think that's an amazing theme that you pick up there, Sarah, is the change that does in fact take time. I think one of the early realizations that we had to make on our coaching journey was that we live in this big ecosystem where we are just one of the players in this massive organization. So, I mean, I work for FMB. We're a large corporate. I think we have something crazy like 40,000 people working at FMB. So it's a substantial organization. And when my mentors first started working with us, they said, you have to realize you're steering an oil tanker. You're not in a speedboat. So you can't just grab the steering wheel and kind of crank it over and then be heading in a new direction. It takes 12 kilometers to change 4 degrees, So, and that was very sage advice. And in fact, I mean, we were frustrated in the early days because we wanted everyone to change. Like, come on, guys, just do something different. And then we would encounter resistance from leadership at various different levels, because they didn't understand that the shift we were trying to make, but also they are expected to hold the status quo to some extent, right? The organization can't just be this chaotic thing where we all just do our own thing and we don't stick to governance and we don't align with our group strategies, etc. And so things have to take time to shift into a new direction. So after 5 years, we're starting to see within the mainframe division that I've been a part of that the shift is really starting to take hold now from traditional plan-driven development to a more agile way of thinking. And we're having people reaching out to us more and more, asking for help and kind of showcasing some of the things that they're doing. So there's definitely the pendulum is starting to swing more toward a inspect and adapt and an experimental way of problem solving, where we give each other a lot of feedback, and we frequently demo the work that we've done, and we kind of, in a way, we sort of lifting the hood and saying, come and have a look at what we're up to. We want to do a demo sooner rather than later, rather than in the old traditional way of saying, okay, in 2 years' time we'll have this new system for you and it'll be amazing and it'll do all these amazing things. Instead, we'll say, okay, what can we get done in 2 weeks? Come along and see what we've managed to accomplish. And look, sometimes we had a rough, there was a lot of blockers that got in our way, and we unfortunately didn't manage to do that much. But at least we can share with you the blockers that we encountered, and kind of play open cards around what's going on within the IT space. And then other weeks we'll have amazing leaps forward, and you won't be able to believe what the team was able to accomplish within a 2 weeks iteration, or 2 week sprint. So yeah, but bringing everyone into that conversation is so powerful. And what we did find happening a lot of was in the more traditional plan-driven world is people used to fib around how their progress was progressing. I mean, you remember how it was, that everything's great, the project's on track, there's no problems, and then all of a sudden it's like D-Day, we've got a week to go, and they go, oh, nothing's working, this whole project's fallen apart. Turns out that this platform we're building is on fire. Whereas the agile teams tend to have a slightly different thing. They're a lot more honest and say, okay, so the gory detail of how we got to where we are, but when we say we're going to be done by next week, we pretty much can guarantee you that you'll have something working by next week. And so the agile teams tended to leapfrog the non-agile teams, and although the news was not always as rosy getting on the journey, they tended to be a lot more authentic about where they were. And we had this game, and I don't know if it's just an FMBism, but within corporates they talk about delivery chicken. So when you have two teams and they're trying to build something together, like who's going to be the chicken and jump out of the way of the bicycle first. And invariably the agile teams would deliver on their promises, and the other teams that weren't following our way of working tended to be caught at the last minute and delayed the delivery. So it was fascinating to be a part of that. And quite frankly, I preferred the agile way of working. So hence why I went into this career.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, with any new way of doing things, you find that leaders sometimes can be the stumbling block, to new way of thinking and new approaches. What can an organization do to bring leaders on board so that leaders have a buy-in when it comes to agile way of doing things?
So I think that's a really great question, and thanks for asking it, Sarah. I think the success of any transformation, whether it's agile or whatever it is, any new way of working that you're wanting to bring into your organization, it rests on the buy-in of leaders. And I mean, I'm sure you found that in your leadership development courses and in the experience that you've had with working with leaders, is that if they like an idea and they think that it's going to work for them, then they'll support it, and they will kind of be willing to try new things and experiment a little bit themselves. Whereas if they're, a little bit doubtful as to whether this new change is actually going to help them achieve their goals, because at the end of the day, it's all about achieving our goals, right? Whether they're strategic or tactical goals or whatever it is. then they're less likely to support that change. So what we have come to learn in our experience is that focusing on that leadership team is so critically important, because they are the ones that determine the ultimate success of any transformation. In this case, let's say our agile journey. And it has to extend beyond just paying lip service. So maybe we'll have a great meeting with the CIO, and he'll say, "Okay, cool, let's try this agile thing. Like, off you go, organize yourself into 2 teams, and we can, Johnny over there, he can add the Scrum Master role onto his job as he's currently doing." And so they kind of lukewarm around committing to it, I suppose. And then we start getting into an agile way of working, and the team has planned out their work, and they've decided what they're going to focus on for the next 2 weeks in their sprint. And then the leader comes along and says, "Yeah, that's great. I know you've got these plans, but this new thing came in, and drop what you're doing and just do this thing." And so then they start to interfere with the team's way of delivering. Because that's what they've always done, right? The leaders comes in there and they go, "Oh, hold on, there's this market shift that's happened. We have to respond to change in this different way." And so they have the ability to undermine the journey that the team is on from a change perspective. And so it's so critical that leaders appreciate the role they play within supporting those changes, whatever it might be, and how they can support it or they can hold it back, actually. There's different layers of leadership. Obviously, we have the senior, the executives who kind of running the show, and they come up with strategies that will move the organization into the future. And so they have to be on board with the agile way of working. So obviously they need to support breaking work up into prioritized backlogs and working in these small increments, etc., to deliver. But at the same time, you have the middle management layer as well. And these are the guys that are actually the ladies and gents that are in charge of the people on the ground that are building out the products for the organization, whether they're software products or physical products or whatever it is. And that middle management layer has been put in place to try and maintain the status quo. That's always been their function, right? They're there to make sure that the governance is happening, that people are completing their timesheets, and that we're doing our annual performance reviews, and that the budgets are being managed, and keeping the organization on track. And so they are by nature employed to maintain the status quo. So them to shift with you and allow a new way of working, you have to invest a bunch of time with the senior leadership to try and help them to understand why it's okay to try this new way of working, but also give them the airtime to voice their concerns and say, like, hold on, what happens if we don't do budgets properly anymore? I mean, we're going to be insolvent within a year. So have a dialogue with those middle management leaders and say, okay, this is what we are prepared to try, and these are the things that are not negotiable. So it's an ongoing conversation, and I think that's always the key when it comes to any change, is having a conversation. I think you'll find if you chat to some of your change management colleagues in other podcasts, I'm sure they'll echo something similar, that bringing people into the conversation is one of the key success factors in any change to make it stick.
Very, very profound. Really, really profound. So, do you think certification is key for the people who are going to be involved with the delivery of agile projects? What's your opinion on that?
So to be honest, my journey with certification has kind of been a bit of a rambling one. So, I mean, I've now got a whole lot of certifications myself over the years, having been on training, etc. And to be honest, I don't think that they're super important in terms of getting a new job, but I think they are critical in making sure that you have that level of competence that you need in order to do the job effectively. So I'm placing a greater and greater value on having the right certifications within the team members that are working in my team. So, for example, at the moment, I'm looking after 4 Scrum Masters, and they're responsible for looking after 8 teams within our department that I'm a part of. And I've made sure that each and every one of them has been on a certified Scrum Master training course with a certified Scrum trainer, so that they at least have the foundation in place. And it's important to me that they have passed the test, so that they've demonstrated a degree of competence, so that I can trust, when we're having these conversations together, at least we're working from a shared base where we have a common understanding of what it is that we're trying to achieve. Because without those certifications, I might say daily stand-ups, and in their mind, they read something on an article somewhere, and they're thinking of something totally different, right?
Yes.
And perhaps to them, it's a daily status meeting. And for me, I don't know, for me, it's something different. It's our opportunity as a team to inspect and adapt and say, okay, what overnight and what happened yesterday, and how must we change the way we're working today so that we can respond to that? So I think certification is very valuable in terms of just making sure that we have that shared base, and certainly in the key roles within the Scrum space. So we have, in a Scrum team, there are 3 different roles, right? There's the Scrum Master, which is the person who's like the servant leader who creates the container in which the team is able to operate. They're the ones who set up a little bit of structure, and they make sure that they're having the conversations with the upstream product owners, etc., and that the work that the team is focusing on is the right work and it's important, etc. Then we have the actual development team themselves, and so Scrum just calls them the development team, but in the IT context, that might be your programmers and your analysts and your testers. But perhaps there's a lot of other organizations that are trying Scrum. For example, HR, if you've got a human capital department that is trying to support an organization, they too can run Scrum, and their team might be comprised of different roles, right? Talent sourcing and organizational design and that sort of thing. So there's different ways of delivering. And then you have what's called the product owner. That's the 3rd role within the Scrum framework. And the product owner is the person, it's only one person, because we don't want to have dissent amongst the decision-making process. It's expensive. And they set the focus for the team. So they're the ones who look at the backlog, they look at the priorities, they have the conversations with the broader organizations and the other stakeholders, and they decide what the team will work on next. And they also answer the question. So when the team comes back and says, I've got a dilemma, do I do this thing or do I do that thing? The product owner is the person who can give them that clear direction and say, that's what we need next. That's going to give us the value that we're looking for to lift this organization. So those are the different roles that you have within the Scrum team. And so together, the whole team has to pull together in order to understand what it is that they're building and to deliver something of value, right? I think the key in any organization, doesn't matter who you are, is you want to make sure that the time that you're spending is valuable, and that what you get at the end of it is actually taking the organization forward. So, we all want to try and organize around that value. And sometimes we don't do a very good job of it. Like sometimes we miss the mark. But the sooner we get that feedback and realize that we're off track, the sooner we can actually correct it and get back onto a more valuable path.
Absolutely, and beautifully said there. Let's look at organizations with regards to organic agility. We know that an organization is a living organism, and this is what we're trying to make people understand, even in leadership development. With the whole new use of machines in the workplaces, people are having new conversations. Is it people first? Is it machines first? Tech first, people first. Let's just explore organic agility. Do you just want to talk a little about that?
Sure. So there's this notion, coming out of the industrial era, that we are a production line, right? And at a point, that metaphor worked so nicely for us, actually. Before we got into knowledge working, we could think of companies as organized as big production lines, right? We would, I don't know, if you were a hardware store, you would be creating physical products, nails and hammers and whatever it is. And then it made sense to have this production line where you could put the raw materials into one end and the finished product spat out the other side, and we could go and sell that to market. But in the knowledge working world, we're not really like that anymore, right? In fact, to be honest, I don't think we've ever been like that as knowledge workers. So we deal with lots of different challenges. And one of the beautiful things about the information age that we live in is when we write software, we can run it 1 million times. Once we've written a cool app, like WhatsApp, for example, once they've perfected the platform and it works as you would expect it to, they can roll it out to billions of people across the world. Everyone can benefit from WhatsApp without any person having to physically go and do a piece of work of those billions of users that come on. So the computer takes care of all of that. So our job has shifted as knowledge workers. Our job is to create those apps and those pieces of software that we can use 1 million times over. But the actual process of creating those new pieces of software tends to be very different each time, because we hardly ever do the same thing twice. And so if you think about it, in an organization, we like to apply this industrial age thinking where we think, oh, we're a machine, right? If we take a business requirement and we put it into the process, it's going to follow all these different steps, and then it'll come out on the other side as working software. But in reality, what we've come to learn is that work doesn't follow those processes down to the letter. What tends to happen is we come up against unexpected challenges that we didn't know we were going to encounter because we've never solved this problem before. And all of a sudden, we need a new way of thinking. So then we'll phone up our buddy and say, Sarah, I know you're really busy, but I need your help with this thing. I'm having difficulty. I can't get this table to work in my database, and I know you're the expert, so please can you just help me? And so we have these networks of people that actually get the work done, and that's very much more like the natural world, right? We have organisms that all work together in harmony with one another to survive and to thrive with one another. So the actual way that work gets done is with teams of people, and the teams problem solve together. And sometimes problem solving means going to other teams of people and asking them for their help. And so if we try and apply this mechanistic process-driven thinking to solving complex challenges that we've never done before, we find that we wind up getting caught short, right? And so organizations are actually a lot more organic in nature than they are like machines. So what happens if Adrian's having a bad day and he is just not feeling well on that given day? Like all of a sudden that cog in the machine is not going to function the way you wanted it to, and so the whole organism reacts accordingly. So, for example, in COVID, just to go back to that example, because it's kind of top of mind, we had key people within our organization who got sick, and they were gone for 2 weeks. And all of a sudden, the organization had to respond and go, well, how the heck are we going to change our way of being with one another so that we can still deliver to our stakeholders? And so we reorganized, and someone else stepped into their role. Well, maybe it was a group of people who shared out what it was that particular person was doing. And so we rearranged ourselves, like an immune system. We were like, okay, we're responding to this change. Let's figure out how we can still deliver the solution that our stakeholders were expecting, but we're going to do it totally differently to what we thought we were going to do.
Beautiful. So then we cannot talk about organic agility without talking about generative thinking. Let's dive into that. What is generative thinking, and why do you think generative thinking is critical for organizations, especially for people who are in leadership?
Yeah, so that's such a great theme, and in fact, it's another one of those topics that's close to my heart is a generative organization. So there's 3 broad categories that an organization might fall into. The first one being pathological, and that's a horrible organization to be in, right? That's where we're all stabbing each other in the back, and we're trying to cover our bums the whole time because we don't want to get into trouble. And as long as I can, make an excuse and someone else will get the blame. The blame culture, like that's a very toxic organization to work in. Then in kind of the middle ground, we have a bureaucratic organization where we tend to be very focused on the processes and sticking to the traditional way of doing things. And the organization functions, stuff gets done, but it's not very efficient. And perhaps the customers, have a bit of a love-hate relationship with your organization. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have a generative organization where we're open to trying new things. We have leaders who see people as for what they are, these amazing human beings that have these phenomenal brains and these great talents that they bring to the table, rather than just resources that are popped in a cubicle and expected to churn out the same thing day after day. And so they are a lot more innovation and trying new things and recognizing the human element within each of us, and trying to help create a space where we can all bring our best selves to work every day so that we can really show up. And so having a generative mindset is one in which you allow people the opportunity to experiment and try things. And I think it was Eric Ries in his Lean Startup book who talks a lot about experimenting and not being afraid to fail, right? So I saw a really great quote the other day. We used to think about companies being a win or lose, right? Sometimes we'll be great and we'll create this new product and we win, like, oh, we're the winners. Or maybe something didn't work out and we're the losers, like, oh, we lost. Oh, everyone's so sad, we lost. Whereas the mindset from a generative perspective shifts more to one of win or learn. Like, okay, so it didn't work out the way we wanted it to, but what did we learn? What can we take away from this experience that we can do differently next time, so that when we're faced with this similar challenge the next time around, we'll do things a little differently and we'll get a different outcome. And so, and I think that's, tying back to our new ways of working and new ways of being. If you can adopt that learning mindset and say, we wanted to go to a hybrid meeting and we decided to get everyone, some people came to the office and some people were online. What did we learn out of this? Well, we've learned that it's really hard to have these hybrid meetings where some people, get excluded because the people in the room are having this chat and they're ignoring the people online, or maybe everyone's sitting in the room with their laptops open and they're not having that chat because we're all still, in online mode. So what was it that we learned, and how are we going to do things differently next time around? So that's the more generative mindset, right? It's win or learn.
Beautiful. And I actually think this is the future of leadership. Is this, as a leader, we all have to embrace this way of doing life, because like we were even saying before, it's bringing the humanness to the center of everything that we're doing in organizations and in businesses, if we are to actually get the best out of the people that we lead.
And that's exactly it, right? How do we get the best out of the people that we lead? And so once you have risen to a position of leadership, it's an honor, right? It's a position that contains great power, and you need to acknowledge that power. You need to use it for good, right? It's like they say in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Yes.
So how are you going to direct that responsibility so that you lift others and bring them along on the journey with you?
Awesome. In fact, when I had another podcast with another business leader, this is exactly what we were talking about. The downfall or the challenge of being in a corporate where everything is on spreadsheets, and people are looked at as machines rather than as human beings. And people are starting to challenge that kind of thinking now. And that's where the whole concept of embracing generative thinking as a leader becomes very key.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if the sooner you can adopt that generative mindset, the sooner you'll future-proof yourself and actually put yourself as a leader onto a new path that will take you far. I think my personal opinion, and I suppose there are places where bureaucratic leadership style is necessary. I can't think of anywhere there's a pathological a need for pathological leaders, but yeah, the generative leadership is very much embracing the way the world is moving, right? The fast pace of change and the globalization. I mean, if you're not a generative leader and you're trying to solve a problem like how do we make sure we retain the top talent in this organization, you have to open your mind and say, okay, well, hold on, maybe we can shift the organization boundary outwards and say, right, we're part of a global village. How do we start to tap into some of those global skills? Because perhaps we don't have everyone with the skill set we need within our geography, within our city, that we can bring into the organization. Maybe we need to allow people to work in Cape Town versus Joburg, for example. So we're seeing a lot of that happening, where people are telecommuting from wherever they are. I mean, today I'm sitting in a farm in the Free State chatting to you, and that would never have been possible in pre-COVID days. So yeah, how do we shift our mindset to embrace the new possibilities that are out there? And that's going to set you up for future success, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. What a wonderful conversation we've had. I've really, really, really enjoyed conversing with you and just listening to your very profound perspective on the matter. So, as we wrap up our conversation, Adrian, do you have any parting shots that you'd want to leave our listeners with in light of the conversation that we've had?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think there's this chap that I came across who was the Agile practice lead at BP named John Smart. And he summed it up so beautifully. He said, leadership is team number one. So before you start any other Agile transformation journey, you need to focus your efforts on the leadership team first. So if you manage to get their support and their buy-in, I think that's half the battle won. So definitely look for help. Bring in Agile coaches, because although you might go, yo, these guys are expensive, what you don't realize is that they're force multipliers, and they are able to lift a whole department within your organization. And, you know, if we look at, as business leaders, we look at how we lift productivity within our workforce. And maybe if we can get a 10 or 15% shift, we would feel like we'd had a really great impact. I think taking an organization from a more traditional plan-driven approach to an agile way of problem solving, if you have good coaches on board and appoint the appropriate scrum masters and product owners, you can get a 2, 3, 4 times lift, you know, of the output of the team. And so all of a sudden, when you've got a team of 100 people and they're able to produce twice as much within the same amount of time, and the quality of what they producing is better, so that you know, there's not a lot of rework and a whole bunch of late nights with tech support, etc. Then you can really start to see the benefits of getting someone who can steer the change and help it to move in a useful direction in place. So yeah, it's definitely something to consider. Think about that. It's probably one of the best investments you can make. And you know, I've just finished an investment financial planning diploma, and the biggest nugget that I took out of that is the best investment that you can make is in your education and in yourself. You can invest in the stock market and property and all the rest, but at the end of the day, the new knowledge that you can give to yourself, no one can ever take that away from you. That's quite possibly the best use of your resources, your capital. And so similarly in a business setting, investing in the overall productivity and the knowledge of your team will yield dividends for years to come. So definitely something to think about. How do you spend that investment budget you have wisely? So definitely agile thought.
Well said, and absolutely profound. Learning is going to be our way of life, right? Because the rate of change, you know, is also just so insane. You know, so people have got to keep abreast with investing in themselves, like you said. Yeah.
Becoming lifelong learners, right?
Yes. That phrase is more true now than ever. Yeah. All right then, Adrian. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and you're very knowledgeable. And I hope to have more of you, just to bring more of just your wisdom on leadership. And we need to be speaking a lot about the generative way of leadership, because that's where the success is going forward. That's going to be the only way that we're going to move organizations forward, given the shifts that have happened, and just the way people now are thinking, and the way people are also feeling quite entitled. I mean, you've seen with the Great Resignation what has happened. People just were like, no, we've not been happy with work. We are actually leaving. So it places extra responsibility on how we lead as organization leaders.
Yeah, just to seize on that quickly, they say people don't leave organizations, they leave managers, they leave their leaders. So next time you're trying to wrap your head around the churn in your staff, maybe to spare a moment to think about what the leadership role is in that.
On that note, I will say ciao, and have a fantastic day.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. You too. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.